What happened to anime games? Just a decade or two ago, we were getting masterpieces when it came to anime gaming. The early Dragon Ball fighting games, the Ultimate Ninja Storm Naruto games, and of course, a very strong lineup of Pokemon games, along with some underrated gems along the way. But in the past decade, we have just gotten a bunch of cash grabs where basically it feels like every single year, anime games are just falling in quality. The 2020s have been full of repetitive fighting games, along with a bunch of super forgettable mobile and console games. So why are anime games in such a bad state? Well, to answer that question, we must first jump into the birth of anime gaming. The 1980s marked the birth of anime video games. Dragon Ball, Fist of the North Star, Saint Seiya. If an anime was popular during that time, then there was probably a game made for it. Most of the anime games made in the 1980s mainly just stayed in Japan, with little to no international success. Of course, anime wasn't as mainstream around the world like it is today, which greatly impacted the anime gaming scene. But the 80s laid the foundation for anime gaming, and allowed for there to be more of a demand on anime games. Which brings us into the 1990s, where anime games saw an explosion in popularity and quality. Due to the rising popularity of new gaming consoles, the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, all these gaming consoles gave a lot more exposure to anime games. Along with, of course, anime games improving their graphics, voice acting, and anime cutscenes, which in turn allowed for the games to be more faithful adaptations to their anime counterpart, resembling more with the fans. Fighting games and RPGs dominated the market. The RPG genre was led by Pokemon, with Pokemon releasing their first generation of games during the late 1990s. And the fighting genre was led by Dragon Ball, with the Pokemon franchise and Dragon Ball franchise being the frontrunners of anime gaming. The Dragon Ball and Pokemon anime franchises were so popular that it led to anime getting more exposure in the West and really just around the whole entire world, which ultimately expanded the anime game market. And a lot of companies started to experiment and make a ton of games on many different anime, with the 2000s marking the golden age of anime gaming. At this point in time, anime had even exploded more in the early 2000s than it did in the 1990s, thanks to the big three. Naruto, Bleach, and One Piece all came to explode in popularity and quickly take over the anime world. And of course, since they were so popular, they all got their own franchise of video games. Dragon Ball, of course, was also still a huge player in the anime gaming industry, with the Budokai series, which is really the founding father of anime fighting games and really exploded the anime fighting game scene in popularity. Because the series did so successful, the gaming industry saw a shift towards 3D environments and complex battle systems. However, even though the anime gaming industry was at its all-time best during the 2000s in terms of popularity, quality, and of course sales, oversaturation started to become a problem. The number of anime games being produced and made during the 2000s was an insane amount. During the 2000s, the Naruto franchise had released 7 games, Dragon Ball had 8 games, then One Piece and Bleach had both released 4 games of their own. And that's only the big franchises, with many other of different and smaller anime all getting their own video games. Compared to the 2020s, where we only really see 2 or 3 anime games per year. And all of the anime games during the 2000s mainly followed the same formula, which in turn allowed for these companies to just milk the absolute shit out of these franchises and just push out games every single year, with all the games being super eerily similar to each other. It's kind of like with sports games. Every single year, these companies will update the team rosters, the players, maybe they'll even add in an extra mode. But for the most part, all the games pretty much play the same, and 99% of the games are all the same. The anime gaming industry was definitely still at its peak during this time, but the oversaturation of games, fighting games especially, did not help the future of anime games. which now brings us into the fall. While the 2010s had some gems when it came to anime gaming, cracks in the anime gaming industry had become more apparent. Mobile anime gaming blew up in popularity, with very successful mobile titles like Dragon Ball Z Legends and Fate Grand Order. But the thing with these mobile games, and really just these companies as a whole, is that they focus more on the microtransactions and just making more money than actually creating a good mobile game. This, of course, translated over to console and PC games. And like I said, there was some outliers, still some fantastic games during the 2010s. The Dragon Ball X Xenoverse games, Dragon Ball Z Fighters, the Naruto Ninja Storm games, the Attack on Titan games, which is probably one of my favorite anime games of all time. But for the most part, the majority of anime games during this time period were just cash grabs, lacking originality and any meaningful innovation, with most of them just being reskinned or really repetitive. A really good example of this is Jump Force. Jump Force had the potential to be the best 3D anime fighting game ever created. It arguably had one of the greatest character rosters we have ever seen in a fighting game. Bleach, Dragon Ball, Naruto, One Piece, My Hero Academia, Rurouni Kenshin, Black Clover. Any popular shonen battle anime during that time frame, or just any popular shonen battle anime period, was probably in this game or had characters in this video game. Jump Force also had pretty strong graphics. The art was pretty weak and strange, but the graphics as a whole was pretty good. But it just simply didn't stand out. It was like any other repetitive cash grab fighting game nowadays, lacking any originality whatsoever and just really being boring. The story mode sucked, most of the modes in general just sucked, and the online play shut down just 2 years after the game's release. And Jump Force will be forever known as wasted potential. And many other anime games were in the same boat as Jump Force, with the overall trend pointing towards a decline in effort and quality. But of course not money, because these games were being milked and they were making a shit ton of money still. And because of that, oversaturation was still a huge problem, more of a problem than it ever has been in the anime gaming industry. The Dragon Ball and Naruto franchises released a buttload of games again, like they did in the 2000s, with One Piece releasing double the amount of games they had released the previous decade. Also, new popular anime like My Hero Academia and SAO both became established gaming franchises. And sure, as I mentioned, these games made a shit ton of money, but they were always badly reviewed. And slowly but surely, these games were losing their fan bases. Which makes sense, because eventually fans are going to notice when companies aren't going to be putting in a lot of effort into these games, and also reskinning their games using the same repetitive formulas, the same repetitive mechanics, and really not doing anything new to these games, putting that much effort into them. So naturally fans took interest in other games, and with the growing complexity of game development, it meant that low budget anime titles struggled to compete with higher quality titles. And that's a big reason why we see such a small amount of anime games in the 2020s compared to the 2010s or 2000s. With the anime gaming market being the worst that it has ever been in the 2020s. In 2020, during COVID, anime absolutely exploded worldwide and started to actually become mainstream around the world like it has been in Japan for so many decades. But even with the success of so many different animes and just the anime medium as a whole, the anime gaming industry only continued to decline. Almost every single anime game made nowadays struggles to stay relevant for longer than 2 or 3 months. The reason I got the idea for this video was because of the recent Bleach game that just came out. I can't really judge this game myself as I haven't played it, but from the gameplay that I have watched, the game looks pretty good and the game has pretty positive reviews. But I highly doubt this game will still be relevant 2 or 3 more months after its release. Bleach's popularity is at an all-time high right now due to the 1,000-year Blood War arc being animated. But we all know that an anime game isn't going to be successful by the popularity of their anime IP alone. Otherwise, games like Jump Force, Jujutsu Kaisen Cursed Clash, Demon Slayer, the Hinokami Chronicles, would all probably still be relevant today and be way more successful than they actually were. Especially considering the fact that 1 or 2 anime games are coming out per year. There's really only been 1 Jujutsu Kaisen fighting game, 1 Demon Slayer fighting game, and we have never seen a 3D fighting game like Jump Force where it has that type of character roster from all these different types of animes. And I see this Bleach game following suit with all of the other games that I mentioned. Like I said, it doesn't look like a bad game, but it also doesn't look any different from a mainstream fighting game that has come out in the last 10 years. Most of the anime games made nowadays are always published by Bandai Namco. Bandai Namco does not directly make the games themselves, but they still have a significant influence over all of the games that they publish. Bandai Namco helped out a lot by putting anime gaming on the map, especially in the West. But since it's all published and all of the anime games nowadays are under Bandai Namco, that's probably why we see so many games get reskinned and just be cash grabs nowadays. And Bandai Namco knows that they can release low-effort games every single year and still make a buttload of money off of them. As long as they pick a very popular anime to go along with that certain video game, which they usually always do, then the game will probably be successful and make a lot of money. Because the game could be so shitty, so dog cheeks, but there's always going to be those hardcore fans that always buy the games. And I could see this trend happening for many more decades to come, where anime games just get lower and lower in quality every single year. Because as long as the anime medium as a whole is still popular, then there will always be a demand for anime video games. So the future of anime games is not looking too good, but there are 2 things that I could see happening eventually that could potentially save the anime gaming market. The first thing is that the anime medium falls in popularity and revenue, basically just falling off. Because if that happens, then these anime games will actually have to be good instead of just relying on the success of the anime IP. Also, there will be less of a demand for anime games as a whole, as there will be less anime fans. The second thing that could happen is Bandai Namco could actually get some competition from other publishers. As I mentioned, Bandai Namco basically has a monopoly over the entirety of the anime gaming scene right now, and has for the last decade or so. If Bandai doesn't get competition eventually from other publishers, then they will not feel inclined to make better and higher quality games. They can just keep releasing the same cash grabby, repetitive game every single year. Those are the only 2 things that I could really see happening, and if we're gonna be honest, those 2 things could not happen for a very long time. So all we can do is really hope for the best.